Thanks for the introduction. My name is Rick Wagner. I work for Globus, and you'll see some other logos on here, and that's because Globus is part of the University of Chicago and has strong ties to Argonne. I have a joint appointment at Argonne myself, and you can pick any one of my identities to email me at and reach out to me if you have any questions about this or other things related to Globus and data management. So let's talk about research data management today and what Globus is trying to solve. There is a reality that maybe not so much specifically when data is residing at the supercomputer centers, but when it's at home in the lab or coming off an instrument or somebody, it gets complicated. And we have best intentions, but the question is, how do we track and manage data, even at the simplest level, leading up to the more complex ones? I had this image of a spreadsheet and a piece of paper and a grad student who manages these drives. And somewhere there's line 88. And if that page is ever lost, what's on these drives becomes kind of a mystery. And I know that there's a facility near here where there are literally drives stored in not shipping containers, but storage facilities in large the cabinets and stuff, just because that's the only way they can manage it. So we're trying to improve upon that. And the question is, how do we move, share, discover, and reproduce all of this data? So Globus's primary function and our primary service is that fast and reliable data transfer. Getting data from point A to point B without you thinking about it unless you need to because something's gone wrong along the way. Sharing, the ability to delegate authority for getting data to collaborators, and platform services, REST APIs that we'll talk about. And in particular, from your own storage systems. We don't take over storage. That's why it works very well in this HPC environment, supercomputing environment, where the data is managed and the storage resources are managed by another group, but we get it from there to your resource. And we do this via software as a service, a web application that ties into your existing organizational identities so that you're not dealing with an additional token, password, things like that, so that you can log in and authenticate to a particular resource. It can authorize you to move the data, and then you can authenticate to a different resource using the appropriate identities. So we try to limit the amount of usernames and passwords that you're dealing with. And our goal is to unify the access across the tiers so that data can move between things like your laptop into the cloud, from an instrument back to HPSS and through the other resources that we use. The way that we do this is the software that runs on the site, something that a lot of you who are just coming at it, if you're coming at it as a user, you don't really need to see this, but the administrators can deploy a storage connector to talk to things like HPSS, like they do at Argonne, or Ceph, as we do at Petrel, a resource at Argonne that you may not know about, I'll touch on later, and then connect it to another one. And to you, the user, it's transparent. You're just using Globus Connect, you're just using the REST API, the web interface, whatever it is, to move the data. Now, if you're a developer and you're building something, this might become more relevant. The other capability, like the one I'll keep hinting at, Petrel, where you can share with collaborators, this allows you to really open up a piece of storage and use a delegated authority model to provide access to researchers that as part of your team and collaboration. And so we want to open up repositories. This works very well. There's NCAR runs the research data archive, and they open up a lot of results to users and developers via a repository model. And it can be used for opening up the cloud access to people by using the same type of authentication and authorization mechanisms you would within a supercomputing center. Instruments have become more relevant. The advanced light source and advanced photon source, cryo-EM devices are producing massive amounts of data across research institutions. And of course, sequencing has changed how data is handled in the bioinformatics realm immensely. And all of these need a reliable way to get the data from that critical, very expensive piece of hardware to a repository for analysis and calibration, etc. And if any of you have worked with these instruments, the very often the devices, the computers that are close to them are, I won't say fragile, but they tend to run a specific version of an operating system. They tend to have limited storage. And so having a robust and very fast way to get the data from the instrument after acquisition to a more reliable and more manageable storage solution is critical. And so there's kind of a model where you get Globus deployed near the instrument and data goes to a more centralized store to kick off the more important pipelines. We've done a lot of that with the APS at Argonne, leveraging ALCF resources. And we're going to cover most of these to an extent, but the other key part is that the interface, the way that you can access this service and get to your data is very dependent on your needs. So we have a web application, the very basic, straightforward, I can do everything through the web GUI that allows you to find your data, transfer it to another location, deal with your identities, manage groups, things like that. And then there's a CLI that we'll demonstrate, which is a command line tool where you can log into it, get the access tokens you need to do stuff, and script it. We leverage this quite a bit for automating transfers and replication between locations. And then there's the REST API, which is kind of what everything's really talking to. And if you're doing development and developing a web portal or something similar, then the REST API is the way to go. And they all talk to the Globus services on the back end. So let's tell the story of what we want to deliver and what is capable now. So if you imagine having a instrument that's producing data, then a researcher will transfer the data either through an automated process that's in place or specifically go and through the web interface and move it to a location like a compute facility. Say, for example, from the APS to an ALCF resource like Cooley. The compute facility, after the operation is done, depending on what services are enabled, the researcher can open up and share these with their collaborators, or they could transfer it to specifically the repository that is designed for that, like Petrel. And Globus at that point will manage the access to those. The collaborator can access the data and pull those to their own system. So they could be now operating on the analyzed results and collaborating on the specific refinements and analysis for a publication. If they want to make this process even more reproducible, enable others to access it, share the capability with other groups, they can build a web portal leveraging the platform. And this, so for example, we enable a lot of capabilities via Jupyter Hub to do this. And I mentioned NCAR's Research Data Archive, and there's other portals like the Sanger Imputation Institute. All of these leverage Globus to make these fixed flows more accessible to others. And this opens up the access to data. You can do all of this using the web browser. If you wanted to just say, this is how I transfer, this is how you enable the sharing, this is how we move data around. And all of those various storage types, if the sites and the developers and administrators can need access to, say, S3 or HPSS, it simplifies things by giving a unified layer. And again, the existing identities You don't have to think of Globus as yet another account. It leverages all of your accounts together. Those of you who want to know a bit more about how the model is, we run what we call a hybrid SaaS. There is a portion, the portion at the bottom, that is a multi-tenant service running within AWS, and it is basically only managing the file operations. The data is going between the source and destination via Globus Connect. This is a software package that gets installed near the storage, either on, for example, your laptop or on a set of data transfer nodes managed by a resource like the ALCF. And Globus then handles the movement between those two. It lists the files, identifies them, and moves them across. So the movement is controlled and initiated by Globus, but the actual data itself flows between endpoint to endpoint. That's how we're able to achieve very fast performance, because it's not traveling through our cloud service and we're not storing the data. So if you have a facility like Oak Ridge, NERSC, Argonne, or an Exceed resource, data can leverage all of these fast networks by Internet 2, ESNet, others, and the scale of the data movers deployed at the sites. The other concept is sharing. This is enabled on some resources where there's a delegated access control, where the user that owns the data is able to identify a folder or similar and open up access to collaborators, and Globus manages the permissions. So all the access occurs as the delegated user, the person who owns the data, through their account. And so this is very similar to what you would experience if you used Google Drive or Box or other things. So I mentioned Globus Connect. This is the software that's run to actually make it a Globus endpoint. And endpoints are, we refer to them as collections. They abstract the storage. Globus Connect creates the endpoint and all transfers happen between them. And if you hear the term collection or endpoint, they're roughly synonymous. If you are familiar with Globus and you want to test, there are tutorial endpoints, endpoint 1 and 2. These allow you to move some data around. There's some sample data. They also allow you to create shares. And more, also very interesting, ESNet runs test endpoints that have substantial amounts of data, various sizes, to test performance. So we can use this to test the network connections, the data movers, storage, things like that. Now, for your laptops, whether it be a Windows box, a Mac, Linux, those are the 3 flavors that we support. We have Globus Connect Personal, and this is an administratorless install of the Globus Connect software that opens up your laptop with lots of configuration options for limiting access to directories and things like that. It also handles being behind a firewall or network address translation. So if you're on a private IP address going out through a public one, and it's quick to install and easy to delete. If Greg were doing this, he would probably go so far as to actually install it and delete it. I'm a little bit of a chicken, so I'm just going to make sure that it's running and doing its job. All right, so that's the server side or the client side stuff, the thing that runs on the service. Let's talk about accounts, your identities. This is where what I mentioned about not needing to think about new passwords and identities comes in. So Globus has a concept of an account as being linking of your existing accounts. So you have a primary identity, say for example, mine might be RP Wagner at UChicago, but then I've got these other ones. I've got RP Wagner at exceed.org. I've got R Wagner at anl.gov, I've got rick@globus.org, I've got my personal Google account, I've got my ORCID, which is one that we incorporate. And you may be working with me and only know me through one of those accounts. And in those cases, it would be nice if you can actually share or grant me access or make me member of a group without having to know a specific one. If we're collaborating over in the NSF Exceed space and you want to grant me access, you may know me as RP Wagner at exceed.org, but not necessarily R Wagner at anl.gov. So, did somebody have a question?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
If you don't mind. So you said that for Globus Connect, the data channel is established between the endpoints directly, and
Yes.
only the control channel goes through Globus Web. Is that same for Globus Connect Personal? Like if I have two Globus Connect Personal, is the data channel still goes directly between the endpoints, or is it going through Globus Web?
Greg, I know that there is a relay for initiating the connection, but otherwise than that, I believe that's correct.
That's correct. Both Globus Connect Server and Globus Connect Personal, the data channel is directly between two endpoints.
Oh, great. Thank you.
That was a good question. Thank you. That was one, because we do have a way to work around the NAT issue, but we still want to maintain that. By the way, Globus also has high assurance capabilities, which we use to manage restricted data like HIPAA. And so sticking to this model is pretty important. We need to limit what data goes to and from Globus. And so we keep that to the file metadata. Okay, so you get linked identities, and then I will show you what that looks like in our accounts. And then you also have the concept of consents. This is when you delegate authority to an application to make calls on your behalf. So for example, if you've logged into something with Google and you've seen this application would like to do X, Y, or Z for you on your behalf, that's a consent. And you grant that consent for the application to call the APIs. In this case, we allow you to fully manage those consents because Globus Auth is one of our underlying services that manages that. Okay, that was enough talking about slides for a little bit. Let's do a demonstration. So let me get Safari going. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is log in to Globus. This is globus.org, and up here we have the login button. And when I log in, because as I logged out, you'll see this. We leverage, this is where you see the federated login. We aggregate identities both through CI login, which also aggregates some from InCommon, and then we incorporate specific individual ones like ORCID. So in this case, I'm going to log in with Globus staff, and that's specifically just so I don't have to open up my two-factor during a meeting and slow things down. So you see some redirects. Globus staff is actually a Google account, and I'm going to pick my rick@globus.org. And because I've already authenticated against it recently, it's now available. Now, if I go down here to the left, you'll see accounts. This is this default is the file manager interface, and down here on the left-hand side are the various features that you might use, but we're going to go look at accounts. And so this is where you see my various identities. My primary one, because I've had it for a very long time, is globusid.org, which was a default that was created a while ago and is now not deprecated, but we suggest that people select a different one. So for example, I could have used my Argon, my Exceed, etc. And this is one from a project that I was on, the Data Commons, that was also leveraging Google domains. So you can log in with Google, but when you do, if there's specific domains, then you can log in with those separately. So not all Google logins are equivalent. For example, this is my personal Gmail address, and the critical part of this is this domain, when discussing high assurance, can share data specifically with only this account and not my personal Gmail address. That might not be relevant for everyone on this call, but it is when we talk about secure data.
Okay, you're live.
Rick, I think we have more questions.
Yes, go ahead.
So if you set up a Globus endpoint server for your organization, do you need to create a local account on the server for users to have access to the endpoint?
That is a good question. That depends on whether or not you have an existing identity provider that you can leverage. So when you set up your Globus endpoint, if, for example, you have your campus or organization has an identity provider, you can actually tie that into the Globus endpoint so that you can map your local user accounts to your campus identity. And what this means, like, for example, with the ALCF, when I activate my endpoint and authenticate to it, I actually do it using my ALCF identity, not like an SSH username password prompt on the endpoint, although that is available as well. So, did that cover the question?
Rick, I'm going to respond to in the chat window, but for mapped collections, yes, and host endpoint collections, yes, you need local accounts, but for guest collections or shared endpoints, you don't.
So you do, yes, you do need a local POSIX account, but you can also map that to an external identity provider for the authentication stuff. All right, so let's go, and I am going to show you. So there's up here, one of the first things I'd like to point out in the file manager is the panels. Single panel view, two panel view. Sometimes if you're just browsing data, you want to use the single panel view. And if I click here, it responds and shows me the things that I've been using recently. Greg may have shared some slides with me. I've got my ALCF ones that I've been using, and I've got my bookmarks and some other ones. So if I go to my bookmarks, I can go to ALCF and I see my home directory. And on the right now, some of these other things are active. Now, this one is already activated. Yesterday when I was doing this, it opened up a window that I authenticated against using ALCF. So this does not auto-activate or auto-open, although shared endpoints would. So here I'm going to create a folder, call it demo, and hit enter. And now there is no data inside of demo. I go over here and I put it in the two-panel view, and I go to my bookmarks, and I have a bookmark for my laptop where I'm running Globus Connect Personal, and I have some data. And these are some sample files from the ECP, the Exascale Computing Project focused on machine learning. And I'm going to select the files. And down here, I have a start button that will initiate a transfer. Another really important thing to know about Globus Transfer and where to find it is the transfer and sync options. So I can do some rsync-like things like transferring new and changed files to the point where I actually delete files that were created on the destination. So if I want to do a true replication, source file modification times, and a checksum after transfer. The last one I'll point out, encrypt transfer, by default, if people have not changed anything about the transfer, we default to encryption off, assuming this is open science data, and we want the most performance. However, endpoint administrators can override that. So if your endpoint deals with sensitive data, you can enforce encryption at all times. And you can optionally, as a user, turn on encryption. So I'm going to turn on encryption, and I'll give this a label. ALCF demo. That's not necessary, but it's helpful. Transfer.
We have a question.
And I'll start it. Yes.
So it says, can you explain the difference between a mapped and guest collection?
A guest collection is what we would call a shared endpoint in previous parlance, and I can create one in a moment. A map collection is where you have local accounts and you're mapping the local accounts to the Globus ones. Greg, does that fit the jargon correctly?
Yeah, that does, and I'm responding in the text window as well.
Okay. Let me initiate this transfer. All right. And it's submitted. And I can go, and if I see here there's activity, and there's activity here, so I go down here to activity. You'll see that there is now a transfer. I can click on it, and it shows me that I have 4 files that are being moved. And I could even drill down and see events. Say, for example, if something went like I turned off Globus Connect on my laptop, which I'm about to do. So I just started, or I just paused the Globus Connect. And what will happen is, there, now we've got a warning. So Globus will actually back off and wait if something like that happens. When I reinitiate it, and again, this is Globus monitoring and managing the task. When I turn Globus Connect back on my laptop, it picks up again. So this helps protect transfers and users from the incidents to Irmo sites. Globus is going to retry and keep trying and be the buffer part of it, even if things go wrong at the other location. Say, for example, a single DTN or something goes down. So in a moment, we'll see this finish. Because people are asking about shared endpoints, and I should show them anyways, let's go to the tutorial endpoint. Tutorial 1. So I'm doing oh wow, even though I misspelled it, I found it. So this is one of the tutorial endpoints.
We have another question. It says, is it possible to more frequent updates for transfers similar to Globus URL copies 5-second reports?
You can pull as often as you want using other tools. I don't know what the finest grain level that we can get down to. Greg, have you touched that one?
I just responded that transfer status can be queried using the command line interface or the API set.
Yeah, that's so basically, yes, you can ask it as often as you want. You don't have to wait just for the web app, and we'll do the command line interface here briefly. So I'm going to create a new folder and call it demo share. So this capability is available on the ALCF resources like Mira or Theta. This is available on Petrel, which is within the JLSE. So if you're a project and you want to use it. So if I go to this folder and I click on share, I can create a new one, a new share, and I create it. I've now created an abstraction where this folder here, demo tutorial endpoint, I can open up. And if I go into it and I create 2 folders, I'm going to call them Alice. I'm going to call the other one Bob. I can now go to the permission setting for for that and actually set separate permissions on the subdirectories. That's the key point, is once you have a shared endpoint, you can set permissions. Oh, I followed my steps. Add permissions here. So I can select a folder, and in this case, it'll show me under the directory where I created it. And I'll take Alice and select that. And I'm going to share it, and I'm going to go with Greg Naraki. And I'm going to look him up. And there he is. And somewhere down here, there's Greg at UChicago. And Greg, demo folder. Add permission. And so now Greg now has read access to the Alice folder down here. I could go to Bob and share it with Yasi, or share it to other groups, like all users, anyone who's logged in as well. Now we do have an HTTPS capability on certain types of endpoints that actually allow for anonymous access, but that's only deployed in limited cases at the moment. But it is growing in adoption. Okay, so that is basics of the file manager. Key thing is this pane up here, and then lots of stuff on the left, and monitoring the activity as needed. I guess I should have picked smaller files for my demo. Okay, let's go back to PowerPoint for a little bit. All right, so I showed you the activity monitor, that the ability to look at stuff, and you can actually drill down further and further. And I could have clicked on canceling the task while it was still progressing. So this gives you control over things, like if you initiate a transfer you didn't mean to, or something's going wrong, you can tackle it. We also have groups, and of course the sharing. If you're granting, this is probably one of the most common usage, is if you are granting access to a subdirectory in a shared folder, a group is the easy way to do that. That's kind of very common in terms of with the users on Petrel, where the PI will create a subgroup and then have specific they can access it on. The other one is for roles. If you have, like, say, endpoints can be administered by a group. Say you have a group of users that are system administrators, they're monitoring transfers, they want to be able to pause transfers during a outage or a short downtime, then you can have a group of users allowed to go in, monitor status, and control the endpoints. I'll jump into the browser again briefly, where I'll show you how to create a group, how you send invitations, and then there's things you can get into like subgroups and settings and policies. All of this stuff, of course, is documented. We put a lot of effort into our docs as well. I showed you sharing. This is where we grab a directory and we create the share point abstraction, and you can share with various levels, individual users and groups. And when you create a shared endpoint, one of the more powerful things is that you can delegate authority for setting access controls or updating the endpoint or monitoring things to other users, where that user could actually be a client application. So if you have a web portal that's just data, it can go in and actually create a directory and then set access controls on it and transfer data into it. The client application would be registered to you, so there's still a human that we know owns that client. But in terms of automation, it's really powerful because You don't have to do it all the time. And we know that that application did it, not the actual human, even though we know the human. We looked at bookmarks. I use those to identify things. That's very convenient when you're looking for data that you use all the time, data you are using for a project where you can't always remember what they named it. Creating bookmarks is fairly straightforward. I'll jump back into that when I show you groups. So, and then the other key thing that I'd like you to be aware of is the command line interface. This uses our Python SDK. It is an open source tool, like our Python SDK is open source, and it wraps up all, and sometimes even a little bit more functionality. There's some things that use CLI. Like, for example, if you're dealing with large directories and you want to be able to generate a list, saying Globus LS endpoint app, and being able to get the entire listing into a file or to pass to grep or something is very convenient for those of us who are familiar with the command line and used to working like that. It makes things much easier, and it's also convenient for putting into a cron job. Like I mentioned, replication tasks. It's very straightforward to wrap the CLI in a script and do things on an automated basis. The installation is pretty straightforward. You can do it using pip and or directly from the repository. I'll show you how to log in, log out, help, and then we're going to look at some UUIDs, because that is everything within Globus has a hook, and it's a UUID. Let me stop and run through the things that we wanted to demo. All right, so I mentioned, so let's go back and review some of the stuff we touched on. The first one being groups. These are groups. If I look at, pick one, Excellent Data Stewards. This is a group managing data for some cosmology data sets that we're hosting for machine learning. And if you go to members, there's 3 of us who are working, and we have the responsibility of controlling access to the data and things like that. We don't have any other subgroups. And if you want to create a new group, up here on the upper right, create new group, demo group, to do Globus groups. And I can see which account is responsible for administering it. In this case, I'll stick with my Globus one, and I will put it into all Globus users. So if any of you are logged in, you'll be able to see this in just a moment. Now, when I create the group, I can decide, so I can control the visibility of it, whether or not others can see it, and whether or not they can discover it. And one of the reasons I chose ALCF is because this way it'll be at the top of my list of groups. Now, if I look at settings, there are policies. And you can set whether or not membership requests, somebody asking to join the group, can be done automatically, or if it always requires approval, what level of role somebody has to have to make subgroups, or who can see members, who can see the group. And this is invitation only. So you can't request a membership here unless you're invited to join. And what are the required membership fields in terms of conditions? So I can go to members and invite others. And in this case, I'll go back to Greg again because we need to have And this time I'll use his ANL account and send the invite. So Greg will get an invitation at some point, which he can choose to either ignore or actually join the group. And you can also, if you have where you set it so that a user can request membership, you can send them the URL to the group, including the UUID, and then they'll see the group and they can request to join. So that was groups, and the other thing we touched on, we did activity, bookmarks. So I go back to the file manager, at my bookmark manager here, and from my previous career at SDSC, I still maintain pictures of cats on comment for demonstrations, my laptop, ALCF, etc. So,
Yeah, I have a
yes.
question.
Okay.
Are groups only used to manage access to shared directories? Do they have any other function within Globus? So it's about, the question is about groups, yeah.
Yes, the key thing that they have is the ability to, you can also use them as a way to grant access and roles on endpoints. So if I look at the, I don't know if I have one set up, but within a endpoint, there can be different roles. And for example, here, this is an endpoint where we have a Jupyter demo, Jupyter Hub demonstration, and there's a set of examples. And I'm an administrator, but I've delegated to clients the ability to manage it as well for specific reasons. I could have made that a group. So let's suppose I have an endpoint and I want to delegate authority to some of my team members working on a project. I can actually make them part of a group and they can do this. And so any place a user can fit in, like the manager of an endpoint or the monitoring role for something, a group or client ID can be used as well. So let's look at the Globus CLI. I'll try to make this, hopefully this is large enough to read without being too large. Keep bumping it up a little bit. All right. Okay, so I'm currently logged out of the CLI. And if I say Globus help, I get my list of commands that are available, like ls, transfer, all the same things, get identities, manage bookmarks, things like that. So the first thing I'm going to do is Globus login. And when it does that, and there's various options, actually Globus login help is a good one. If we look at the help command here, you can do things like disable the process that it's going to kick off where it actually makes the browser login easier. So you can do a login where you copy and paste a code, but I'm going to do the very basic, convenient login. And it's very aware of your laptop, or somewhat aware of your laptop environment, and it actually opens a browser tab for you. And now I'm going to log in with my current identity that I logged in last. And here's the consents. So I will click allow, and now I can close this. If I go back, it says I am logged in. And if I say Globus, who am I? Or if I type correctly, who am I? Nope, one more time. That's it, I got it. Globus, who am I? It'll say what my primary identity is in this case. So there's other things I can do, like Globus endpoint search. And I can search for a string like ALCF. And when I do, I see various ones. And since we were just on Mira, key point, the UUIDs. So I'm going to grab this UUID, copy it, and I do Globus LS on the endpoint, and then I'm going to attach a path, in this case, my home directory. And the same way I did an LS within the browser when I first looked at it, it's doing an LS. So I have that UUID. Now, what about Globus endpoint search for MacBook? Now it's going to look within my own kind of context, and it's going to say, oh, there's your endpoint, your personal one. So if I do endpoint and ls this, and I happen to know that users RP Wagner temp demo is a directory. There's the data that I transferred. So what I can now do is Globus transfer -- help. Source endpoint, destination endpoint. So I'm going to go up, and there was a file. It's an old public key that I've had laying around, no longer tied to a private key, but now I can do Globus transfer, and I'm going to transfer from the Mira DTN Rick Air Hub to the directory I just LS'd here, which is my temp demo directory. Do there, and I submit the transfer. So again, unlike Globus URL copy, because I will follow up as to why that trailing slash triggered that. Unlike Globus URL copy, where it's managing the third-party transfer. Here, we've submitted a transfer request. We no longer have to sit and watch this. There is a command, a wait command, where you can actually have it block until it completes if you want to do that. And I should have tested that, because here's the transfer, and okay, so barring my own error aside in terms of transferring things, Greg, do you know what I did wrong there with transferring a file to a directory?
Sorry, I didn't see it, Rick. It's kind of hidden. Hang on, let me.
Here's a file. Here's a directory. Oh, do I have to specify the destination file name?
You do.
Did I forget the obvious?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Thank you. I forgot the obvious. I treated it like a copy command. Okay, so the transfer that is failing gives us the opportunity to demonstrate canceling a task, because it'll keep trying. This one has completed already transferring that small file. If I do an ls, there is now the pub file, and if I do open dot on my Mac, Finder will open up, and there's that old public key. So that's the CLI, which again, UUIDs and remembering to specify the destination of the path. So we're going to wrap up here in just a moment because that was the last demonstration. The other thing we want to touch on briefly is the concept of a platform. This is the Globus platform that is REST APIs that allow you to build things on it, and it's all the same features, but using the REST APIs instead. So if we think about the transfer API, Globus Auth, transfer APIs covers all the data management, and Auth covers all of the things in terms of allowing a user to log in. You can build a web portal now and leverage the same login functionality, and then have it call out to the transfer API and the other services we develop. There's the research data archive. There's, I forget, atmospheric research. I forget what M is in ARM. The Sanger Imputation Institute for uploading genomes. We build a lot of stuff at ALCF. We're developing data portals for the advanced photon source users and others. So it's an active area. There's lots of documentation around these. We have sample notebooks. We run a sample Jupyter Hub server for people to evaluate stuff if you're interested. And then of course, Auth has all of its documentation. And then if you're interested, we highly recommend you look at the Modern Research Data Portal. Native apps are those examples of things that run on your laptop, or on your iPhone or your laptop, things that aren't web portals but still want to leverage OAuth for authentication and authorization. Okay. Finally, I want to touch on Petrel. This is a resource within JLSE at Argonne that is designed to facilitate data access between collaborators and Argonne and ALCF users. It's currently at 3.2 petabytes of storage, and it has a 100 gigabit connection out to the outside world. And it's been tested between there and Blue Waters. It leverages this federated login to allow PIs to manage access to their data. And I use it for E3SM. It's used by a lot of projects from the APS and others. So if you're interested, please go to the website or send me an email. And this is a model that Mike Papka, the director of ALCF, is looking to extend, hopefully to allow people to keep building these collaborative environments while still maintaining the security needs of the ALCF systems. I'll skip the Globus history just to say that we are part of UChicago, and we do plan to be around for a while, and we've got a lot of people that we are very grateful for their support. And by people, I mean institutions like the ones you see here. Lots of numbers. We've become a more and more robust and actively used service. We recently hit Petakilo Day, which was a petabyte moved in a day with over 1,000 users logged in, and that was kind of a fun point. Here in the slide deck at the end, the ALCF has some great documentation on using Globus and within the ALCF. And here is a list of the endpoints. So if you want to access data, these are the systems that are mounted on the various endpoints. For Globus support, we have the Globus docs, support@globus.org. You just tell them what your issue is, and we're very responsive. It's wonderful to have a support team. We have folks like Greg who support customers, and then I lead the team that does a lot of the project-based work. And I believe that is the last slide. And Yasi, I will turn it back to you.